Today's video is going to be about villages and village life in Malawi. First of all, for those who are not familiar with Malawi, I probably need to explain the difference between a village in Malawi and a village in Europe. In Europe, villages are mixed places with a range of different people, most of whom have a car, so they have access to towns and cities, and the majority of rich people live in villages. Or to put it the other way around, the majority of the poorest people live in cities. Now that's not how it is in Malawi at all. The poorest people in Malawi generally live in the villages, and the more remote you get, the more basic the infrastructure and the support systems and the life is in those villages. So a village is a very different place in Malawi compared to most places in Europe. Surprisingly, a lot of people still live in a village in Malawi, compared to almost every country in the world. In Malawi, the figures are somewhere around 80% of Malawians live in villages. Now, for those of us, like me, who live in a city, it's very hard to imagine that there are so many more people living out in villages because they're largely inaccessible. They are off the tar roads, they're not easy to reach, you don't go through a lot of villages on your travels. The most remote places are a very long way from a decent road. So most of the people in Malawi are living a life that is very, very far removed from town, very far removed from cities. A lot of people do not have the money or the time or the ability to travel into a town or a city, apart from very, very rarely. So that is a major difference in terms of the way the whole country is structured. 80% of people living in villages. Even if you compare that with another African country, such as Nigeria, for example, a more developed country, of course, the figure for Nigeria is somewhere between 45 and 50% of people live in villages. In Kenya, it's higher, 60%, but in Malawi, it's around 80%. So quite unusual. In most countries, very large numbers of people have left the villages to go to town or to city, but in Malawi that hasn't really happened yet. And there is still time for Malawi to be able to maintain that, to preserve that. But I think the time is short, and if things are not done quite soon, then I think the race to the cities will begin in Malawi much more seriously, and those numbers, I think, will change rapidly. So life in a village is an uncomplicated life in some ways, based around largely agriculture. There is very little infrastructure in a village. There are the people's houses, there's probably a church or more than one religious building where people go for services. There may be a local bar serving local beer and local cane spirit. That is about it. People do not have much in the way of money and do not use a lot in the way of money in living in the village. Now, obviously, villages are very different. It depends how close they are to town. It depends how large the village is. But overall, I think that's a fair picture. That life brings a lot of challenges, of course, to people. There are challenges about water. Many places don't have access to clean water nearby. There are challenges to do, of course, with money. But I think the biggest challenges and the biggest reasons why people may start to increasingly leave the village are lack of opportunities to make a better life for yourself and lack of food security. And those we'll come back to in a bit more detail in a later video. The question then is, if there are a lot of challenges for people living in a village, and there really are, how do people survive? And why do people stay? Well, firstly, how do people survive? The life in the village is relatively cheap. You are living in your family area, on your family land, maybe in a house that your family have already built in the past, or maybe one that you've built yourself out of local materials. You don't need to pay rent. You don't really have any transport costs. You don't need to do heating. You will go and get your water locally from somewhere. Hopefully you will have a good borehole in the village available. If not, you may have to walk further, but you'll get your water generally for free. And in a good year, you'll grow the basic crops that you'll need for your family to eat. So life in the village can be very cheap. But having said that, most people in the village, I think, do rely on help and support from outside. Most of that support for most people comes from their family. So when things are very tough, for example, there's been a bad harvest, you call your brother in the city or your uncle in South Africa and ask them if they can help you. When there's somebody who is sick in the family or there's a funeral to pay for, you call your brother in the city or your uncle in South Africa and ask them if they can help. So quite a lot of money does come in to the village from family, and that money is crucial for a lot of people in the village to survive long term. Now, we'll come back to this one as well a little bit later when we talk about overseas aid and the effect of the cuts in overseas aid by America and Britain and other countries. But in that discussion about overseas aid, we need to remember that most people living in rural places in Malawi are already getting some kind of financial support, not regular and not as much as they would like, I'm sure, but they may well be getting something every now and again from their family. So most Malawians are already receiving aid in that way. So when we're talking about overseas aid, we need to bear that in mind. So why do people stay? if the life is so tough? Well, I think the main reason is to do with family and community, and the fact that people really value that. People like the simpler lifestyle. People have talked to me about how in the village, first of all, life is cheaper than in town, but also quieter. A lot of people in the village see town and city life as being noisy and chaotic, higher crime in the city, and not enough time to sit and chat with your family and friends and greet people properly as you're walking along the road. And having that slower pace of life is very attractive to a lot of people. There are many people in Malawi who do not want to leave the village. They like the lifestyle that they can have in the village. The problem is the poverty level, the lack of food security, and the lack of opportunity.